Oslo's Gardermoen airport buzzed with routine activity as Sarah's flight touched down, but she knew that beneath the surface, an extensive security operation was already underway. As she disembarked, a Norwegian security officer approached her with professional courtesy. "Ms. Mitchell? I'm Inspector Larson, Oslo Police Security Division. We've been expecting you." Sarah nodded, noting the inspector's alert posture and the subtle presence of additional security personnel positioned throughout the arrival area. "What's the current status at the convention center?" "We've identified the individuals from your intelligence reports," Larson replied as they walked quickly through the airport. "Marcus Webb and his associates are still in the vicinity, but they've been more careful about avoiding surveillance since this morning." They reached an unmarked security vehicle waiting outside the terminal. As Sarah climbed into the passenger seat, Larson continued his briefing. "The challenge is that the conference has attracted over 2,000 attendees, plus media and support staff. We can't simply shut down the event without concrete evidence of a specific threat." Sarah reviewed the updated intelligence files on her tablet as they drove toward the city center. "What about the inside assistance angle? Have you identified potential security compromises?" "That's our biggest concern," Larson admitted. 3 staff members have been flagged for unusual behavior over the past week. 1 maintenance worker, 1 catering supervisor, and 1 audiovisual technician. Sarah's trained mind immediately processed the implications. Perfect positions for reconnaissance, access to restricted areas, and ability to place devices without suspicion. Exactly. We're monitoring all 3, but we can't detain them without more evidence. As they approached the Oslo Convention Center, Sarah could see the building's imposing glass and steel structure rising against the gray Norwegian sky. Multiple police vehicles were positioned discreetly around the perimeter, and she noted the professional spacing of security personnel. "Where is Princess Zara currently?" Sarah asked. "She's at the Grand Hotel, about 10 minutes from here. Her scheduled departure for the convention center is in 1 hour." Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Morrison. "Webb spotted entering convention center through service entrance 20 minutes ago. Exercise extreme caution." She immediately shared this information with Inspector Larson, whose expression grew grim. "If Webb is already inside the building, we need to consider postponing the princess's appearance," Larson said. "That's not the decision," Sarah replied firmly. "But we need to establish exactly what we're dealing with before she arrives." They pulled up to the convention center's security entrance, where additional Norwegian officers were waiting. As Sarah stepped out of the vehicle, she noticed the heightened alertness of every security professional in sight. Inspector Larson led her through a secure entrance to the building's command center, where multiple monitors displayed feeds from dozens of security cameras positioned throughout the complex. "Show me where Webb was last seen," Sarah requested. A technician highlighted a corridor near the main auditorium. "He entered through the service area here, then moved toward the mechanical rooms beneath the stage." Sarah studied the building schematics displayed on a large wall monitor. Those mechanical rooms would provide access to the stage's support structure. If someone wanted to place explosive devices. "Our thoughts exactly," Larson confirmed. "We have teams sweeping those areas now, but the building is massive and Webb clearly knows it well." Sarah's secure phone rang. Morrison's voice came through immediately. "Guardian 7, we have a significant development. British intelligence intercepted communications indicating the action is planned for exactly 14:30 hours, during the princess's speech." Sarah checked her watch. That was 90 minutes away. "Inspector Larson," she said, ending the call, "we need to make a decision. Either we evacuate the building and postpone the conference, or we implement maximum security protocols and proceed." Larson looked at the multiple monitor feeds showing thousands of conference attendees moving throughout the building. Evacuation would create chaos and, potentially, more danger. If Webb has devices in place, panic could trigger early detonation. "Then, we proceed," Sarah decided. "But I need direct access to your tactical teams and real-time communication with all security units." As if summoned by the urgency in her voice, a Norwegian tactical officer approached their position. "Inspector, we found something in the mechanical room." He led them to a monitor showing a camera feed from beneath the main auditorium. On the screen, they could see a small electronic device attached to one of the support beams. "Explosive?" Sarah asked. "Our bomb disposal expert is examining it now, but the preliminary assessment is positive. It's sophisticated, remotely triggered, and positioned to maximize structural damage." Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her in crisis situations. Her years of royal protection training had prepared her for exactly these moments when multiple threats converged simultaneously. "How many devices might there be?" she asked Larson. "Unknown. If Webb has been planning this operation for weeks or months, he could have placed multiple charges throughout the building." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message from Zara's personal protection officer, Princess, requesting status update. She's aware of security concerns but prepared to proceed with scheduled appearance. This was the moment Sarah had been trained for, when personal safety, public duty, and national security interests had to be balanced against incomplete information and developing threats. "Inspector Larson, I need your honest assessment. Can your teams secure this building and neutralize the threat within the next hour?" Larson consulted with his tactical commander before responding. "We can sweep for additional devices and track down Webb and his associates. But I cannot guarantee 100% security." "No one can," Sarah replied. "But, based on your professional judgment, can we provide adequate protection for the princess?" "With your expertise added to our team, and with appropriate modifications to the security protocols, yes." Sarah made her decision. "Then, we proceed. But I want the princess's route through the building modified, her time on stage minimized, and continuous communication between all security units." Over the next hour, Sarah worked with the Norwegian security team to implement a comprehensive protection plan. Additional devices were found and neutralized, 2 of Webb's associates were detained, and the inside assistant was identified and arrested. But Webb himself remained at large within the building. When Princess Zara arrived at the convention center, Sarah met her personally at the secure entrance. The young royal was calm but alert, clearly aware of the seriousness of the situation. "Ms. Mitchell," Zara said, "I understand there are significant security concerns." "There are, Your Highness. However, we've implemented protocols that we believe will ensure your safety. The decision to proceed is ultimately yours." Zara straightened, displaying the same courage that had defined her family for generations. "The environmental crisis is too important for fear to dictate our actions. I'll deliver the speech." As they moved through the secured corridors toward the main auditorium, Sarah maintained constant communication with the security teams. Webb had been spotted twice more, but had evaded capture in the building's complex layout. When they reached the backstage area, Sarah could hear the murmur of over 2,000 conference attendees in the main hall. In 30 minutes, Princess Zara would step onto that stage to deliver one of the most important environmental speeches of her career. Sarah's earpiece crackled with an update. "Guardian 7, bomb disposal has cleared 6 devices total. Building is secured for the event." But, even as she acknowledged the update, Sarah's instincts told her the story wasn't over. Webb was still free in the building, and a person with his training and motivation wouldn't give up easily. As Princess Zara prepared to take the stage, Sarah positioned herself where she had the best view of both the auditorium and the access routes. Her hand rested casually near the concealed weapon she hoped she wouldn't need to use. The morning had begun with James dismissing her as someone who couldn't afford proper travel arrangements. Now, thousands of miles away, she stood as the final line of defense between a member of the British royal family and a threat that could change the course of international environmental policy. When Princess Zara stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause, Sarah scanned the audience with professional vigilance. Somewhere in the crowd or the building's support areas, Marcus Webb was watching, waiting, and planning his next move. Sarah smiled grimly as she remembered James's condescending attitude at Heathrow Airport. He had suggested she couldn't handle standard airline procedures, while she was actually preparing for an operation that would determine whether one of the most important environmental conferences in decades would end in triumph or tragedy. As Princess Zara began her speech about climate action and international cooperation, Sarah maintained her vigil, knowing that the next 30 minutes would test every skill she had learned in her years as a royal protection specialist. The audience listened intently as the princess spoke about environmental responsibility and global cooperation, unaware that beneath their feet and in the building around them, one of the most complex security operations of the year was reaching its climax. James would never know that his dismissive treatment at Heathrow had delayed the very person whose expertise was now protecting an international conference and a member of the British royal family. But Sarah knew, and as she watched Princess Zara deliver her powerful message to the world, she understood that sometimes the most important work happens when ordinary people have no idea anything unusual is occurring at all. Morrison walked alongside Sarah toward the security checkpoint, her voice low but urgent. Guardian 7, the Oslo situation has escalated beyond our initial assessment. Intelligence suggests the threat level has moved from potential to imminent. Sarah nodded, her expression hardening. What's the nature of the threat? Princess Anne's granddaughter, Zara, is attending a climate conference at the Oslo Convention Center. What appeared to be routine environmental protesters this morning has been reclassified. MI6 intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated action plan for this afternoon. They paused at the VIP security lane, where additional personnel were already waiting to expedite Sarah's passage through the checkpoint. James watched from his counter as the woman he had dismissed as a budget traveler was escorted through procedures reserved for heads of state and diplomatic personnel. The local Norwegian security team requested British assistance. Specifically, Morrison continued as Sarah placed her items in the express screening bins. Your reputation from the Vienna incident last year preceded the request. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. The Vienna incident had been classified at the highest levels, but word had spread through international security circles about the British agent who had identified and neutralized a threat that local authorities had missed entirely. How much time do I have once I land? Sarah asked as they moved through the checkpoint. The conference begins in 4 hours. Zara's scheduled to speak at the afternoon session, which puts her on stage exactly when our intelligence suggests the coordinated action will begin. As they walked toward the gate, Morrison's phone buzzed. She answered immediately, listened for 30 seconds, then ended the call with a grim expression. That was the Home Secretary. The threat assessment has been upgraded again. We now have credible intelligence suggesting this isn't just about disrupting the conference. There may be a specific target. Sarah stopped walking. Zara? The communications intercept included references to the British princess. There's only one person at that conference who fits that description. They resumed walking, but Sarah's pace had quickened. Her training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but the thought of a young royal family member in danger activated every protective instinct she possessed. What do we know about the group behind this? Sarah asked. They call themselves the Earth's Last Hope Coalition. Sounds like environmental activists, but their methods suggest something more sophisticated. The planning involved multiple countries, encrypted communications, and coordination that requires significant resources. As they reached the gate area, Sarah noticed the unusual number of security personnel positioned throughout the terminal. What appeared to be routine airport operations was actually a carefully coordinated security response to her urgent deployment. Morrison handed Sarah a secure tablet. This contains everything we know about the Oslo situation, including building layouts, security protocols, and threat assessments. You'll have the full flight to review the materials. Sarah scrolled through the briefing documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. The Oslo Convention Center was a complex building with multiple entrances, underground parking, and a design that created numerous security challenges. The Norwegian team is competent, Morrison noted, but they're accustomed to handling environmental protesters, not coordinated threats against high-value targets. They've requested someone with royal protection experience. What's my official capacity once I arrive? Sarah asked. You'll be integrated into the existing security team as a consulting specialist. The Norwegians have been told you're an expert in crowd management and threat assessment. They don't need to know the specifics of your royal protection background. A gate agent approached them respectfully. Ms. Mitchell? We're ready to begin priority boarding whenever you're prepared. Sarah looked at Morrison. Any final updates? The Oslo police found surveillance equipment positioned around the convention center this morning. Professional grade, not the type of equipment typically used by environmental activists. This confirms our assessment that we're dealing with a more sophisticated operation. As Sarah prepared to board, she reflected on the irony of the morning's events. James had assumed she couldn't afford a proper ticket, when in reality, her travel was funded by one of the most secure government accounts in Britain. He had dismissed her as ordinary, when her job involved protecting some of the most extraordinary people in the world. But, the morning's delay, however frustrating, had provided crucial additional intelligence. The upgraded threat assessment meant she would be walking into a situation far more dangerous than originally anticipated. Guardian 7, Morrison said as Sarah reached the jetway, remember that your primary objective is intelligence gathering and threat assessment. You're not authorized for direct action unless there's imminent danger to the principal. Sarah paused. Understood. But, if the situation escalates beyond the Norwegian team's capabilities? Then, you do whatever is necessary to protect British interests, Morrison replied with the kind of authority that carried the weight of the highest government offices. As Sarah boarded the aircraft, she was escorted to a first-class seat that had been specially reserved. The cabin crew had been briefed to provide her with privacy and any assistance she might require during the flight. Once settled, Sarah opened the secure tablet and began reviewing the detailed threat assessment. The Earth's Last Hope coalition had been monitored by various European intelligence agencies for months, but their activities had seemed limited to peaceful protests and social media campaigns. The intercepts from the past 24 hours painted a different picture. References to making a statement that the world cannot ignore and targeting the symbols of environmental destruction suggested a group that had moved beyond peaceful protest. Most concerning was a fragment of conversation that mentioned the British princess must understand the consequences of her government's policies. This wasn't random targeting, someone had specifically identified Zara's presence at the conference and planned accordingly. Sarah pulled up the building schematics for the Oslo Convention Center. The main auditorium where Zara would be speaking had excellent sightlines for security, but also multiple potential access points for threats. The underground parking garage connected directly to service elevators that could provide unmonitored access to the building's upper levels. Her phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Morrison. Additional intelligence suggests possible inside assistance. Trust protocols elevated to maximum security. Sarah frowned as she processed this information. Inside assistance meant someone with legitimate access to the convention center was potentially compromising security. This transformed the mission from threat assessment to active counterintelligence. She began reviewing the personnel files for the Oslo conference staff, looking for patterns that might indicate security risks. As a royal protection specialist, she had been trained to identify potential threats not just from obvious sources, but from individuals who might be compromised, coerced, or radicalized. The flight attendant approached discreetly. Ms. Mitchell, we have a secure communication channel available if you need to make any calls during the flight. Sarah nodded her thanks and returned to the briefing materials. The more she learned about the situation in Oslo, the more convinced she became that the morning's delay at Heathrow had actually been fortunate. The additional time had allowed British intelligence to uncover crucial details about the threat level. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Sarah's secure phone buzzed with another encrypted message. This one made her blood run cold. Surveillance footage from Oslo shows individual matching known extremist profiles conducting reconnaissance of convention center. Threat level upgraded to critical. She immediately opened a secure communication channel to Morrison's team. Guardian 7 to control, she said quietly into her headset. Requesting immediate update on critical threat assessment. Control to Guardian 7, came Morrison's voice. The individual in question was identified through facial recognition software. Marcus Webb, previously connected to radical environmental groups with history of violent action. He was photographed this morning studying building access points. Sarah absorbed this information while continuing to review the building layouts. Marcus Webb wasn't just a passionate activist, he was someone with the knowledge and willingness to escalate peaceful protest into violence. "What's Webb's background?" Sarah asked. "Former military, explosives training, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago. He's been linked to increasingly radical environmental groups across Europe. His presence in Oslo cannot be coincidental." As Sarah processed this intelligence, she realized that the mission had fundamentally changed. This was no longer about assessing potential threats or providing consultation to local security. A trained explosives expert with a history of violence was actively surveilling a location where a member of the British royal family would be speaking. The aircraft was still 2 hours from landing, but Sarah was already mentally preparing for a situation that could escalate from threat assessment to active protection within hours of her arrival. Her secured tablet chimed with another update: Webb not working alone. Surveillance identified at least 3 additional individuals with suspicious behavior patterns around Convention Center. Sarah closed her eyes and ran through her mental checklist of emergency protocols. For potential threats, inside assistance, a high-value target, and a building with multiple security vulnerabilities. The Oslo operation was shaping up to be one of the most complex assignments of her career. When she opened her eyes, she began drafting her preliminary assessment report. Morrison and the Home Secretary would need to know that the situation in Oslo required more than consultation, it demanded immediate and decisive action. The morning fog hung thick over Heathrow Airport as Sarah Mitchell approached the British Airways check-in counter. Dressed in simple jeans and a plain black jacket, she carried only a small duffel bag and a worn leather portfolio. To any observer, she appeared to be just another ordinary passenger preparing for a routine flight. The young man behind the counter barely glanced up as Sarah placed her passport on the surface. His name tag read James, and his expression suggested he had already decided this would be another mundane interaction in his long shift. "Destination?" James asked mechanically, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Oslo, Norway." "Flight BA 762, Sarah replied quietly, her voice carrying a slight Scottish accent. James scanned her passport, then frowned at his computer screen. His eyebrows rose as he typed something, paused, then typed again. The frown deepened. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your booking," he said, his tone shifting from bored to slightly annoyed. "The system shows this ticket was purchased with a credit card that's been flagged for suspicious activity." Sarah's expression remained calm. "There must be some mistake. That's my personal card, and I've used it many times before." "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I can't process this check-in. The system won't allow it." James's voice grew more condescending. "You'll need to contact your bank and get this sorted out, then purchase a new ticket." A queue began forming behind Sarah as other passengers grew impatient. James seemed to enjoy having an audience for what he clearly viewed as a routine denial of service to someone he assumed couldn't afford proper travel arrangements. "Is there a supervisor I could speak with?" Sarah asked, her voice remaining steady despite the growing attention from other travelers. "Look, miss," James said loudly enough for others to hear, "I've explained the situation. Your card is flagged, which usually means insufficient funds or fraud. Either way, you're not flying today." An elderly woman in the queue behind Sarah shook her head disapprovingly. A business traveler checked his expensive watch with obvious irritation. James seemed to feed off their reactions, puffing up his chest slightly. "Perhaps you could suggest the next available flight once I resolve this matter?" Sarah asked politely. "Tomorrow's flight is completely booked, and the weekend flights are even fuller," James replied with barely concealed satisfaction. "You might get something next week if you can actually pay for it." Several passengers chuckled at James's comment. He had clearly positioned himself as the voice of reason dealing with yet another traveler who had overreached their financial capabilities. Sarah nodded slowly, then reached into her jacket pocket. Instead of the phone James expected to see, she pulled out a small, unremarkable black device that looked like a simplified mobile phone. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said quietly. "May I make one call to clarify my situation?" James rolled his eyes. "Ma'am, calling your bank isn't going to change what's in their system right now. You need to physically go to a branch and sort this out in person. But Sarah was already pressing a single button on the device. She held it to her ear and waited. The call connected almost immediately. "This is Guardian 7, she said in a voice that suddenly carried an unmistakable note of authority. "I need immediate assistance at Heathrow Terminal 5, British Airways Counter 12. Standard protocols apply." James's smirk faded as he noticed the change in Sarah's demeanor. The woman who had seemed apologetic and confused moments before now stood with military bearing, her eyes scanning the terminal with professional awareness. "Understood. ETA 4 minutes," came a crisp voice through the device, loud enough for James to hear. Sarah ended the call and slipped the device back into her pocket. She then did something that made James's stomach drop. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile or an apologetic one. It was the smile of someone who had just activated a process that would fundamentally change the dynamics of the situation. "What was that about?" James asked, his confidence wavering for the first time. "Just clarifying my travel authorization," Sarah replied, her Scottish accent now carrying undertones that suggested extensive training in very specific skills. The other passengers in line began to notice the shift in atmosphere. Conversations quieted as people sensed something significant was happening, though they couldn't quite identify what. James tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, I don't care who you called. The system is the system, and you're not flying today without proper documentation and a valid payment method." "I understand your position," Sarah said calmly. "However, I think you'll find that my documentation is actually quite comprehensive once the right people review it." As if summoned by her words, a group of 4 individuals in dark suits appeared at the edge of the check-in area. They moved with coordinated precision, their eyes constantly scanning the environment in a way that immediately identified them as security professionals of the highest caliber. The lead figure, a tall woman with graying hair and steel blue eyes, approached the counter. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from years of managing situations where failure is not an option. "Good morning," she said to James, producing a small leather credential case. "I'm Assistant Director Morrison, Royal Protection Unit. I believe you're experiencing difficulties with one of our personnel?" James stared at the credentials, his face growing pale as he read the official government seal and authorization codes. His hands began to shake slightly as he looked from the credentials to Sarah, then back to the credentials. I don't understand," he stammered. Morrison's expression remained professional but firm. "The individual you've been addressing is Guardian 7, currently assigned to advanced security operations. Her travel is classified under government protocols, which override standard commercial airline procedures." The queue behind Sarah had grown silent. Word was spreading through the terminal that something unusual was happening at Counter 12. Airport security personnel began positioning themselves discreetly around the area, though their presence suggested support rather than containment. James looked at his computer screen, then at Sarah, then at the growing crowd of officials surrounding his workstation. His mouth opened and closed several times before any words emerged. She said her credit card was flagged," he managed to say. "Guardian 7's financial arrangements are managed through secured government accounts," Morrison explained patiently. "The flag you're seeing is a security protocol that requires additional authorization, which is why we're here." Sarah remained silent throughout this exchange, watching James with the same calm expression she had maintained since arriving at the counter. However, there was now something different in her eyes, a hint of the steel that lay beneath her unassuming exterior. Morrison turned to Sarah. "Guardian 7, what's your assessment of this situation?" For the first time since the conversation began, Sarah's voice carried the full weight of her actual authority. "The staff member has been thorough in following his procedures. However, his approach to customer service could benefit from additional training in professional courtesy." James felt the blood drain from his face as he realized the magnitude of his error. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or a system glitch. He had been dismissive, condescending, and openly mocking towards someone whose job involved protecting the highest levels of the British government. Morrison nodded. "Understood. We'll address the procedural aspects with airline management." She turned back to James. You will now process Guardian 7's travel authorization according to the protocols I'm about to provide you. As Morrison began explaining the security procedures required for Sarah's flight, James noticed that other airport personnel were watching the interaction with intense interest. Word was spreading rapidly through the terminal that something significant was happening at his counter. Sarah's phone buzzed quietly. She glanced at it, then, at Morrison. "Ma'am, I have an update from Oslo. The timeline has been moved up by 6 hours." Morrison's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "How significant is the advancement?" "Category Alpha," Sarah replied, using a code that made Morrison immediately straighten. "James," Morrison said urgently, "how quickly can you process this authorization?" James, still reeling from the revelations of the past few minutes, fumbled with his keyboard. The system needs to accept the new payment authorization, and then." "How long?" Morrison repeated, her voice carrying a note of command that made it clear this was no longer a request. 5 minutes, maybe 10 if there are complications," James replied, his arrogance completely evaporated. Sarah stepped closer to the counter. "James, I need you to understand something very important. The reason I'm traveling to Oslo isn't for a vacation or a business meeting. There are people whose safety depends on my arrival within a specific time frame." For the first time, James truly looked at Sarah. He noticed things he had missed before, the way she stood with perfect balance, ready to move in any direction, the way her eyes never stopped scanning the environment, the small, nearly invisible scar on her left temple that suggested she had seen serious action. What kind of work do you do?" he asked quietly. Sarah exchanged a glance with Morrison, who nodded slightly. "I protect people who can't protect themselves," Sarah said simply. "Sometimes that means standing in front of a door for 12 hours. Sometimes it means other things." The implications of her words hung in the air as James began processing her travel authorization with newfound urgency. His hands moved quickly over the keyboard, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by focused professionalism. But, even as he worked, questions raced through his mind. Who was Sarah Mitchell really? What kind of situation in Oslo required a royal guard's immediate attention? And how had he managed to nearly derail what was clearly a mission of significant importance? As the minutes ticked by, Sarah remained patient but alert, her attention split between the check-in process and the constant stream of information flowing through her earpiece. Whatever was happening in Norway, it was serious enough to mobilize the highest levels of British security. James completed the authorization process, but, as he handed Sarah her boarding pass, he could see in her eyes that the rail story was just beginning.